Hello. I hope you guys are doing well. Welcome again to what I think of as week two, but however you're doing your work, I hope you are all doing well and I hope you're staying healthy and safe. Today I'm going to do a short lecture on the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now you can find your own copy of Gilgamesh in the readings file um, on our UNM Learn site. All right. Now, a few things about Gilgamesh just to get started off. I know that sometimes it's a little difficult. Some of the names are a little different. But really, I think it's a pretty fun story. And it's a story that tells us a lot, not only about ancient Mesopotamia, um, but also about the way that we develop as human beings. And I think it's a fun little story to read. Now, Mesopotamia, as I'm sure you're reading in both your textbook and other materials, all right, is what we call this area the Fertile Crescent. And it's generally between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates River Valley. And what's important about these rivers is that they flood their banks and they provide very fertile ground to grow things like grains. And this is one of the first areas in the world that we study for the development of cities and civilization. It's located largely in today what would be Iraq, parts of Iran, and other countries down by the Persian Gulf. All right, this is just another map of the Fertile Crescent. The other thing that's important about the Fertile Crescent is that one could travel from the area down there by Sumer, all right, over towards Syria and the Mediterranean. This became a center of trade and commerce and development of complex civilizations. Now, many different civilizations have grown up in this area. What we're going to be focusing on today is that area down there called Sumer. All right, the Sumerians were some of the first people to have many different kinds of complex city-states and civilizations. And so they're an interesting place for this class to start, as many of the questions that we're going to ask about Sumer, we're also going to ask about many of the civilizations that come later. All right. Now, the Sumerians are really the first to begin to found what we call city-states. Now, city-states are exactly what they sound like. They are an entire country contained within one walled city. Now, we will see city-states in Sumeria. We will see them very famously in Greece. And basically, city-states have their own ruling structure and in many cases their own religious structure. Now, all of the city-states in Mesopotamia are very similar, but they are all autonomous, which means that they often don't like each other and they fight each other. The Sumerians never developed an overarching culture, and that means that many other peoples, the Akkadians, the Hittites, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, are going to come into the region and conquer these citizens and these city-states over time. Now, interestingly, all of these people adapt their own version of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Must be pretty cool. Now, Sumerian society, what we know of it, all right, is a very hierarchical society. And that means that the king and the religious authorities are at the top of the pyramid, and the vast majority of people are at the bottom of the pyramid. In ancient societies, there isn't a great deal of people who are in the middle. The religious authorities and the king work hand in hand, and there is no social mobility in the ancient world. All right, in America, we love this idea of working our way up, pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. And that was not a concept in the ancient world. If you were born into a particular class, that is a particular class in which you died. Now, these are all of the city states we see along the Tigris and the Euphrates River valleys. And right down there, with a little arrow there, you can see the city of Uruk. Now, we don't know that the Gilgamesh story is based on history. We do know that there was a king named Gilgamesh in the city of Uruk. Many historians have theorized that writing about a king like this might be a little bit like writing about other famous kings, in which you could insert a story about them and everybody would know who they were, like the Knights of the Round Table, right? You would say, oh, that's King Arthur. We know who King Arthur is. Then you'd go on to tell a story that might not have any relation to King Arthur. King Arthur might stand in, as Gilgamesh does, as an archetype. Now let's talk about what that means. One very important thing to think about in this story is that the Sumerian belief in the afterlife is frankly just plain old terrifying. The Sumerians did not believe, as the Egyptians did, or as many other peoples did, that there was anything after life. Enkidu in this story has this dream, and this dream represents the Sumerian vision of the afterlife, where he simply goes down into a dark place that's full of dust and he eats rocks, and that's it. Now, if you believe that that is your vision of the afterlife, you're going to be very interested in things like living forever. The Sumerians, as a people, believed, again, that this life is it. You don't go anywhere after this life. And that's a very important and prevailing theme in Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is constantly trying to live forever. And one of the reasons is his terrible fear of death, because no matter what kind of a great king you are, even if you are the great King Gilgamesh, you're still going to go to that house full of dust and shadow and eat rocks forever. The other thing to understand about the Sumerian vision of the afterlife and this life is that the Sumerians were polytheistic. So polytheism means a belief in many gods. And this is very common in the ancient world. We will not meet monotheism for a long, long time. And people in the ancient world really used religion to explain a world that was at the same time beautiful and provided for them, but also could be terrible and cruel. The gods of the Sumerians are not particularly benevolent. All right, they come out of nature, as we can see on this slide, the god of the sky, the god of the air. But even when people ask them for help, they rarely just help in a simple way. All right, the people of Uruk ask the gods for help because, basically, to put it shortly, Gilgamesh is a jerk. He is their king, but he is taking advantage of his power. And instead of treating him in some other way, all right, they have this long, complicated way of doing their business. All right, the gods seem to enjoy basically playing with human beings, and they seem to sort of regard human beings as items for their amusement. Now, the Sumerians as a people are around for quite a long time, all right, 5000 BC to 2100 BC, and they continue to be around to this day. It's just that they are eventually subsumed in other sorts of empires. Now, Sumerians had a very technologically advanced society. All right. They built large stepped temples called ziggurats. They were able to master the wheel and sails. All right. And they used the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates River Valley, to transport things, to sail up and down. Obviously, they fished with it, they used it to farm. Um, they developed a very precise 12-month calendar. All right. Um, they had a lot of mathematics that later people like Pythagoras, right, are going to go back and discover and reinvent for themselves. They had a complex understanding and mapping of the stars, but they did not use this to travel beyond the bounds of their own society. Like the Egyptians, they viewed the Tigris and the Euphrates River Valley as the center of the world, the way the Egyptians viewed the Nile that way, and they really found little need to travel outside of it. Okay, now the Sumerians also invent um, what we in this class are going to call the world's first system of writing. Now, in Western Civ, we don't include China all that much. I'm pretty sure that the Chinese had systems of writing before cuneiform, but let's go with this. So, cuneiform, as that picture shows you, is a bunch of little kind of squiggles and dots and various kinds of things. Now, cuneiform develops out of the necessity of trade. All right, if you're going to have any kind of complex system of trade, you're really going to need to develop a system of writing. All right, if I sail down the river and I have 3 chickens and I want to trade you my chickens for your grain, but your grain isn't ready yet, you and I have to develop a contract. And in order to develop contracts, we need to develop language. So language first grows out of economic necessity. Now, Gilgamesh, the versions that we have are written in cuneiform. And one of the neat stories is that for a long, long time, all right, other civilizations developed versions of Gilgamesh, especially the Babylonians. But for many, many tens of thousands of years, all that is lost to the world. Now, eventually, all right, we have the discovery in the 19th century, all right, of these 40,000 clay tablets in cuneiform. And initially, for quite a number of decades, no one is able to read cuneiform. And then we get a wonderful break, all right? And it's really through Gilgamesh. Historians realize that languages that come later, languages used by the Babylonians and the Assyrians, um, that they are able to translate because they have Greek translation tablets to those languages. They realize they're telling the story of Gilgamesh and they're able to work backwards and begin to read the cuneiform tablets. Now, it still takes over 20 years. And if you ever thought you had a hard job thinking about sifting through 20, 40,000 clay tablets of Gilgamesh, give you pause. But we are able to get back to the earliest version of this epic. And again, within the realm of this class, this is the earliest example we have, all right, of an epic story. Now, why is that important? Now, the legend of Gilgamesh is an epic, all right? And a lot of epic stories have a fairly similar sort of a storyline, and it may be one that's familiar to you if, I don't know, you like things like our modern epics, right? You think of Star Wars, you think of Lord of the Rings. Epic stories are ways in which societies create things called archetypes. Archetypes are ideal forms. All right, so they are the forms that you are supposed to imitate. So again, King Arthur is the ideal form of a king. In Gilgamesh, what we have is a fascinating window into the cultural beliefs of the Sumerians, as Gilgamesh and the characters within this epic are archetypes for different forms. And I think what you're going to find is that it's very confusing because archetypally, they don't really match up to what we think in Western society or any society, modern society, kings should be. So again, um, many of these different peoples, all right, who come in and who conquer the poor Sumerians are going to have their own version of Gilgamesh. And this is very good for historians, again, because we are able to work our way back and eventually be able to translate the original cuneiform. Okay, so I'm going to give a brief summary here and just talk about sort of a few things here and there and some themes. Again, I really think you guys should go and find this in the readings folder, get your hands dirty, so to speak, and read it. It will be on the midterm. I will give you some questions about it, but let's get into it. Okay, so our main man, all right, is Gilgamesh, who's the king of Uruk. Now, Gilgamesh, when we first meet him, basically is a jerk. All right, he is big and strong. Okay, and kings in somewhere like Uruk would be expected to be strong and violent. But Gilgamesh is so strong and so violent that the people of the city basically complain to the gods about him. They say that he kills all the game for himself. Now, one narrative throughout this story is about masculinity and sexuality. And Gilgamesh is such a jerk that he shows up at other people's weddings and asserts his right as a king to be the first one to make love to their wives. And just think about that for a minute. Even in Sumerian society, which is very different from ours, that was a real jerk move. All right? Now, part of this story is about Gilgamesh's transformation. All right? Gilgamesh, as the center of the hero's journey, okay, goes through a transformation from basically being a jerk to basically being less of a jerk. And these are very silly terms, but part of what epics do, all right, is they show us character development of the main character. Now, Gilgamesh's best friend, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, Enkidu. Now, Enkidu is someone who is created by the gods, all right? We call him the wild man. And he becomes Gilgamesh's best friend. And through his friendship with Enkidu, again, Gilgamesh is able to grow as a person. All right? One of the main themes that's going on here, okay, is that we as adults and individuals need to interact with other people in order to reach our true possibility. All right? In order to live our best life, if you want. Now, Enkidu and Gilgamesh go on these mini adventures that you will read about. Eventually, Enkidu dies, and Gilgamesh has to come face to face with the stark reality that everybody dies. No one lives forever. So, the end of the story is about Gilgamesh going on another quest by himself in search of immortality. In the second part of the poem, we find the earliest version of the flood story from Genesis. The ancient Jews were banished to Babylon and clearly had read this story when they wrote the story in the Bible. But again, what Gilgamesh finds is that our actions and our legacy is what make us immortal. All right, I think I've gotten a little ahead of myself. I'll let you read this slide briefly. Again, reading something like this that we're going to do several times gives us the ability to look back into a culture and to see what that culture valued the most, right? What do they think were these archetypes for kings, for men, for women? Coffee. Now, the archetypal hero is studied by a man named Joseph Campbell. All right. Um, and Joseph Campbell was really good friends with the whole Star Wars family. And again, Star Wars is another example of the journey of an archetypal hero. We see a lot of parallels between other great epics with Gilgamesh in the Odyssey. Again, we think about the transformation of our main character. We deal with major themes in a society: life, death, manhood, manly manness. Now, archetypal heroes have a set of sort of traits that we think about. Now, in the beginning of this story, we find that Gilgamesh is 1/3 god, 2/3 human. That's always bugged me. There must be some sort of uh, social, cultural thing that I'm missing. Like, why isn't he like Hercules, half god and half man? But he's not. He's a third god and 2/3 man. What does that mean? I don't know. An important thing is that you're going to read a lot of things in Gilgamesh that aren't necessarily going to make sense to you, and that's okay. Again, these are cultural flags that if we were back in Sumeria or Babylonia, we would understand, right? But we're not. So all we can tell is, that seems important, but I don't really get it. Now, Gilgamesh has extraordinary powers. All right. He's very strong. He's brave. But number four is really important. All right. Gilgamesh has tragic flaws. Okay. He's conceited. He's a jerk. He doesn't treat other people well. Okay. And generally, working through these flaws through his friendship with the Kidu is what this story is about. All right. I'll let you just briefly go through these here. All right. Again, we see in this story, as we do in the Odyssey and in Star Wars and in Lord of the Rings, the journey of one hero. Okay, and he's discovering himself, he's discovering his strength, his moral character. Now, Gilgamesh and other stories like this, right, would have been read out loud. They would have been sort of, you had a feast and you feast and you drink. The Sumerians liked beer. And then someone would come out who would have memorized all of these tablets. All right, main themes before you go and you read all this. All right, the world is cruel and unpredictable. Remember that the Sumerians, again, lived alongside a river, and mostly that was fine. The river provided many things for them, but every once in a while the river flooded and killed everybody. So the Sumerian vision of life is a life that is often hard and cruel. All right. The gods don't really care about you, they like to mess with you. Nature, again, can provide, but also can destroy. You really never know from one day to the next. Two, it's through other people that we reach our true potential. All right. When the people of Uruk complain to the gods about Gilgamesh's jerkiness, the gods create Enkidu, the wild man who lives out in the wild. We then have a shepherd who sees Enkidu who, when he would put out his food and water for his animals, would come down and eat with them. And Enkidu did not know that he was a man. Eventually, a temple harlot, all right, which is a basically a ritual prostitute, and yes, sex was used in religion. We shouldn't be too freaked out by that. Goes to Enkidu, and they make love for a week. And after that, Enkidu becomes a man. Enkidu then goes and meets Gilgamesh, and they have all these crazy fights. All right, this is similar to sort of Robin Hood and Little John, and they can't really best each other, though maybe Gilgamesh can, and so they become buddies. All right, so Gilgamesh becomes a better person through his interactions with Enkidu. Enkidu becomes human through sex with the harlot. All right, basically, what it's telling us is that we as human beings, all right, become our full potential, our full possibilities through interactions with others. Finally, everyone dies. All right. Eventually, the goddess Ishtar, who's a goddess of love and one of only several female characters in this epic, takes a shine to Gilgamesh, but Gilgamesh rejects her. In a rage, she sends a creature called the Bull of Heaven to kill Gilgamesh, which Gilgamesh kills. And finally, in order to really get back at Gilgamesh for rejecting the god of love, she makes Enkidu sick, and he dies. So Gilgamesh has to deal with the fact that every human being is mortal. Eventually, Gilgamesh goes on this long quest to try to find the one man who survived the Great Flood. And again, this Great Flood story is identical to the one in the Torah, the Old Testament, but it predates it significantly. This is definitely the origin of that story. Eventually, he fails in his quest, but by the end, he realizes, all right, that the way that one lives forever is through one's actions. So through being a good king in the city of Uruk, through building the walls of the city high, through probably writing this epic about himself, right? He lives forever. We're still talking about Gilgamesh in 2020, and that means pretty much that he lived forever. All right, so these are some major themes. Again, these all make really good questions for the midterm, so I might go back over the poem if I were you and read it and think about these themes. Last few slides here, I'm just going to go over a few of the characters just to set you guys up, all right? So again, Gilgamesh is the king of Uruk, all right? Strongest of men. He is the archetype of the Sumerian king. He's brave, he's strong, but at the beginning of the story, he's a jerk, all right? He abuses his power. Much of our story is focused on his character development from being a jerk to being less of a jerk. It's also about Gilgamesh dealing with the fact that everybody is mortal and death is a part of life. Again, you have to think about that in terms of a backdrop in which the Sumerians did not believe in the afterlife. Enkidu, again, Enkidu is the wild man. The gods decide that in order to keep Gilgamesh in check, all right, what he needs is a friend, a buddy, someone equally as strong and as fierce as him. Now, I don't mean to freak anybody out, but there are some strong homoerotic tenets going on between Gilgamesh and Enkidu. All right, they wrestle around naked. They don't really like ladies. Remember that Gilgamesh refuses the goddess of love, Ishtar, in order to come hang out with Enkidu. Now, we really don't know how the Sumerians felt about same sex relationships. And so I can't really tell you what this means, but I think you will notice it. All right. This is a very male narrative. And, these guys are very, very special friends. But Enkidu, on another level, right, becomes Gilgamesh's soul, becomes his conscience, becomes the way that Gilgamesh realizes what it really means to be a man, to be a king, to be a friend. All right, friendship and companionship is very important to the story. Enkidu's probably my favorite character. All right, and again, Enkidu suffers the wrath of the gods for Gilgamesh's actions. And eventually, it takes him days and days to die. It's very, very sad. So, kind of like a death of Yoda kind of situation. All right, and through, again, Enkidu's death, it helps to transform Gilgamesh's understanding of life. And finally, we have the two women in the story. Again, a gendered reading of Gilgamesh is really fascinating, but really difficult. All right, it's really hard because we don't stand on solid footing in terms of how much we know about Sumerian society. But there are really only two women. All right, um, there is the temple harlot, Shamhat. All right, and basically, her power is the power of civilization, of fertility, of sex, of creation. There doesn't seem to be any shame in her job. All right. And clearly, people who lived close to the earth understood how things worked. All right. And, she is the goddess, works in the temple of the goddess of all of these civilizing things. All right. Lovemaking, food, alcohol, music, clothing, architecture, agriculture, herding, and ritual. These are the things that we look at in order to define a civilization. All right. So her female power is the power to basically drag men out of the mud. And fellas, we all know this to be true. Now, probably the most puzzling figure in this whole thing is goddess Ishtar, goddess of love and fertility. But she's also the goddess of war. All right. Called the Queen of Heaven. She is, on the one hand, a nurturing mother figure, and on the other hand, a terrible, um, battle hardened warrior queen. All right. She is spiteful and cruel. She does not mess around. So clearly, the Sumerians had a different vision of motherhood, a different vision of love. It's not quite as, you know, I don't know, touchy feely as a Judeo Christian one. All right, Ishtar is as close as we come to things like the Virgin Mary, maybe more like the Virgin de Guadalupe, right? Um, but she really is no joke, all right? And she basically is the reason um, that Enkidu dies, all right? After Gilgamesh shuns her, which is very rare, right? People often don't shun the goddess of love. Um, but in a way, we have another cultural marker here, all right? Love sometimes can be cruel, right? If you fall in love with the wrong person or the person doesn't reciprocate your love. So we have all these fun characters. I really think this is a neat little epic to read. It shouldn't take you all that long. You'll have a little bit of work to do on it, but I hope it's a fun thing to do. All right. Thank you very much. Please stay safe. Again, if you have questions, shoot me an email. I will be in the discussions this week, trying to get a little more discussion going on. I was real happy with them for the first week. So I hope this finds you well. All right.